Well, welcome again, everyone. And for those of us on the Westish Coast, good morning. For those of you on the East Coast, good afternoon. So very glad you could join us today to talk about what's our favorite topic, quarterly performance. So thank you so much for being here. This has been a little while since we've had our last meeting. So, we would have technically met at the very end of December when you all were on leave or scrambling to get things done when the office was a little bit quieter. So happy to have you with us and to be connecting with you once again. I'm Cynthia Forland, consultant working with Department of Labor, vets. So happy to be here and happy to share some information with you, but more importantly, be able to hear from you. So what is this all about? And we'll just go over this for a moment because we haven't had one of these sessions since the end of September. So just want to give a reminder as to why we're all here. It's a forum for any questions or concerns from HVRP grantees on technical issues of quarterly reporting. So how do you prepare? When you got your meeting invite, you got a little reminder if you had a chance to open the meeting invite. You got a reminder about sending any questions or concerns you might have in advance of the session to the HVRP DOL mailbox, or you can be asking questions during the session. And in preparing for this one, we went back through and looked through the last couple of months of inquiries into the HVRP mailbox just to see what sorts of things folks were asking about. So we've got some content here related to that. In terms of follow-up from each of these sessions, we do put together a Q&A, question and answer document relating to the things that are discussed. You might have noticed in the meeting invitation, you had the Q&A from the September meeting. We'd sent that out previously, but just wanted to send that again. And typically we meet the last Wednesday of each quarter at 3 o'clock Eastern. You'll notice that we made an exception due to the holidays, so that can happen as well. But that's the general cadence for these meetings, so that about the time that you're needing to think about doing quarterly reporting is when we set up these sessions, so that hopefully it's right on time information that you really need or questions you want to ask right when you want to ask them. I just want to point out and give a shout out to Vets HVRP leadership, folks who I'm sure are familiar to you by now, but Maria Temikel, who's the Director of Grants and Training, and then Layla Awamu, who's the HVRP program lead. So one of the things we wanted to do, and maybe this is partly just with a new year and sort of a resolution sort of thing, New Year resolution, is to talk a little bit about why we're here, why we're talking about performance. Obviously, we talk about the mechanics of it, but let's take a step back and think a little bit about why performance matters and what this is all about. And as you know, the work that you do is incredibly important because you're working with veterans who are at risk or experiencing homelessness. So this is a very high need population and a very important program. So because of that, VETS places a very high priority on maximizing successful grant performance and relies on this quarterly performance reporting to measure and track a grantee's success toward achieving satisfactory outcomes. So this is not just about checking a box in forms, which sometimes I'm sure it can feel like that in your day-to-day work when you're like, oh yeah, I got to submit this. Why do I submit this? It's ultimately about making sure that veterans experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness are getting the best possible services as you're working with them. So that's really the big idea here. So just wanted to take a step back to reflect a little bit on that, because sometimes, like I said, it can be very easy to get into the nitty-gritty and kind of forget why we're here. So measuring performance. As you all are well aware, just a little recap, grantees propose targets for each of the performance indicators. And that process really starts with the application process when you apply to be a provider of HVRP services. And then the expectation on an ongoing basis is that grantees perform at 85% or more of the planned targets. So why 85%? Well, basically understanding that some things are going to be outside of your control. So allowing a little margin there. It's not a matter of if you're saying that you're going to get 65% placement rate, and if for some reason you're not quite at that, it's not automatically a failure. That's why we talk about the 85% to give a little wiggle room there. And let me just point out, as going along through these first couple of slides, please, throughout put your questions in the chat. Also, if you want to put in the chat, you can use the raise your hand feature, or if you want to put into the chat that you have a question and you'd like to unmute yourself to ask that question, please feel free to do that, because the idea of this meeting really is to be able to hear from you and what questions you might have. We plan some content of things that we think would be helpful for you to be updated on, but really it's about being able to hear from you. So this is a lot of stuff on this. These next two slides, there's a lot of stuff on the slide. So don't be nervous. It's largely a simple message in that we want to make sure it's entirely clear that there are 7 indicators, performance indicators that you're well aware of, right? Every time you fill out your report, you know there are those 7 indicators that you're looking at. And this is looking at the first 4. So the number of participants enrolled, average hourly wage at placement, placement rate overall, placement rate for episodically homeless. So those are the ones that can lead to a corrective action plan. Now, no one likes to think about a corrective action plan because we all want to cruise along and meet at least our 85% performance of the targets that we've set. But corrective action plans can be important in providing technical assistance and support so that you can ultimately better serve the veterans that you are attempting to serve. So this is consistent with current guidance. We know there has been some confusion, partly because in the FOA funding opportunity announcement that goes out, there are 7 measures, and we ask you to report on 7 measures. But just want to make clear that in determining whether or not there should be a corrective action plan, the focus really is on these first 4 measures that are happening more in real time, I like to say, rather than the more follow-up measures, and we'll get to those on the next slide. And you'll see here in some of the greater detail on this table in breaking out how things show up on the TPR and the TPN is there are different quarters when these things show up simply by nature of the way that the nature of these measures. So for instance, enrollment, number of participants enrolled, that's something that's going to pop up in that first quarter in your TPR, and you might be commenting on it in your TPN because enrollment happens immediately. Whereas placement rate and employment and wages, that sort of thing is going to be showing up as early as the second quarter. Now moving to the second slide, which has the additional 3 measures, which are not generally used in CAP determination. Those are the ones relating to employment, second quarter after exit, wages, second quarter after exit, and employment, fourth quarter after exit. So for those of you who might have worked in the world of WIOA, American Job Centers, these are measures that are pulled from that. So that's what these are. They are not used in determining a corrective action plan. There is space on the TPN where there's an expectation that if in fact there is an issue there with performance where you can comment on that, but that would not trigger an additional formal corrective action plan. So let me take a breath and pause because I've given you quite a bit of information here. Do you have any questions about this information we've just talked about in these 2 slides? Feel free to write. If you have a question, write it in the chat. You can raise your hand and unmute yourself if I call on you. So multiple ways that you can share information. But the biggest takeaway is you're entering information in 2 different forms, the TPR and the TPN. And you're reporting on measures. Ultimately, whether or not there's a corrective action plan is going to be most dependent on those first 4 measures, not the follow-up measures. Okay, and feel free if you come up with other questions about what we just talked about, go ahead and put them in the chat. It's not like you're going to miss your opportunity, because I do want to make sure I mention that there are some updates to new versions are available. I want to start by giving a big thank you to those of you who have caught little bugs in these documents. These are older documents, legacy documents, we might call them, that will be in the near future replaced with far more technologically advanced data entry methods. But for right now, this is what we're working with. So when you catch things that aren't quite working, we really appreciate that, and we try to jump on that to make sure that we're able to make fixes to those so that you're not trying to deal with something that's confusing or doesn't really make sense. So the screenshot over here in the right lower hand side for HVRP performance, this is what it looks like on the DOL HVRP website. Whatever the links are on the live website, those are going to be the ones that are the most current versions. And then we do have a question in the chat. Real quick, you mentioned 85% of the target percentage and then mentioned a 65% target. That was a bit confusing. Rachel, thank you. Okay, that's entirely fair. So the 85% is whatever 85% would be of your target. So if, for instance, you said, because you need to predict basically something of a crystal ball to say, well, realistically, I think that 65% of the folks who exit my services are going to be placed into employment. So we don't say you better make that 65% no matter what, understanding that there's a little margin there. So the exceeding or not is whether you're 100% above of your own measure. But then there's that window in there to say, well, if you're making at least 85%. So in the example of a 65% planned employment rate, that would mean as long as you're at 55.25%, in other words, 85% of that 65%, then you're not going to be expected to put together a corrective action plan. I hope that helps. And next time we could also have some examples on the screen of some of those so you can see. But basically it's 85% of the target you set. And a target you set could, for instance, be 65%, 70%, 75%. So let us know in the chat, Rachel, if that didn't help or we want to talk about it. Okay, great, awesome. I know it can get confusing when you're talking about percents of percentages, right? So totally. When calculating the 85%, do the results round up? That is a good question. So generally you could, if you have any questions about how something is rounding or if you think you're not showing up in the right space, then please reach out to your goder about that. But in terms of the way that the form works, it's going to be doing at least to a 10th of a percent. So for instance, if you were to say, like that example I just gave you of 55.25, that would show up up to the 10th. So that would show up as 55.3 as you're filling out the form. So if you have anything at 55.3 or above, keep the questions coming. So as I mentioned, whatever links are live on the website, those are the most current versions of the forms. So that's what you really want to use. And like I said, because of feedback you provided, glitches that we've found, these are updated versions of the form. So if in fact, and just to recap as well, if in fact you're in your second or third year, if you're in your second or third year of your period of performance, you would be using the PY20. Well, I should say if you're in your second year of period of performance, you would use the PY20 form and you would not need to switch over to this new form. But for any PY21 grants, so grants that started in July, you would want to be using these new forms. And it's just a reminder as well, there's a TPR field definitions reference guide that provides information on the data fields that are in the TPR, as well as a summary of changes for the TPR that is constantly updated, so that if you're wondering, well, what's new, what's going on, why did you update the form, you can see that there. Yes, Dr. Chambers, I've got a hand up.
I'm very confused because our goder sent us these new forms.
Okay.
And we're using them, but we're in our second year of a 3-year performance period. So you're saying we're not supposed to be using these? I just want to be clear.
Kate.
So this is Kate. Yep. No, to clarify, sorry, this is a little bit confusing. So yeah, so let's say in your example that you are in the second year of your grant, you would continue to complete quarters 5 through 8 in your PY20 TPR. So that you should continue to use that one for PY20.
Right.
So we don't, yeah. And then for PY21, the beginning of this program year, use the PY21 TPR that's on the website, or that you should have received from your coder.
Okay, so we're okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Sure thing.
Thank you for that clarification, Kate. Yes.
No problem.
So yes. So if you were in the second year, but that's quarter 1 of your second year, you would be using the PY 2021 forms, but you wouldn't start over from scratch with the new form for people who you were reporting on starting in PY 20. Sorry if I made that more confusing than it needed to be. Okay, so we now want to get some oh wait, do I have another hand up still? Oh, okay, looks like it went away. So we have a poll for you because we want to better understand, especially as thinking about ways that we are going to be improving the TPR going forward, is want to understand a little bit more about how you use the form. And we've got 2 questions here. The first one is already up there on the screen, so please go ahead and vote. When you enter participant information in the TPR, do you use form view or the spreadsheet view? So if you're kind of wondering what on earth, good, we're getting answers already. But if you're wondering what I'm talking about when I say form view, that means when you go into that tab, if you hit the space bar, that brings up a form view that's more of a form, basically looking thing to fill out. Or do you fill it out in the raw spreadsheet view? Or does it vary depending on the situation? Okay. It looks like about half of folks are using that spreadsheet view. Who doesn't love a good spreadsheet? And then it sounds like about a little over a quarter of you are using the form view, and 22% say it varies. So depending upon the situation that you're in. Great. Let me just give a moment or 2 more for folks to respond. Okay. And then the question, what is the form view, right? So when you go into the individual participant tab in the TPR, if you at the very top cell, if you click the space bar, that brings up a totally different view to be able to enter information in, rather than entering it in a spreadsheet, going row by row and entering across the rows. Okay. And I think if we want to go to our second poll. Oh, thank you, Kate. So Kate put in the chat a visual there of where you would be able to access the form view. Thank you, Taylor. So now we have our second poll. And if you don't see that popping up on your screen, you can see it over there in the chat, which also means you can scroll up and still respond to the previous poll. So one of the additional tabs in the TPR is the goals versus actual tab. And so what we want to know, this is not one you have to enter information in at all. So we just want to understand whether or not you use that tab, just to be able to look and see how things are coming out for your grant in terms of meeting those targets that you would have set. So do you use it? Yes, every quarter. Yes, only as needed or for specific measures. No, the other report tabs are sufficient. No, not sure how to read it. Or I have no idea what you're talking about. And there are no wrong answers here because, like I said, this is not where you're entering information. So it might very well be that you've not looked at that. So it looks like the vast majority, 69% at this point, say, yes, we use that every quarter to take a look at how we're doing in terms of our targets. Great, excellent. And then we see 24% saying, you know what, it depends. It's as needed or for specific measures. Maybe if there is a measure that you happen to be on a cap on, so you're keeping a closer eye on that. Once again, Kate, thank you. She put into the chat there a screenshot of what that tab label looks like. And then we've got 6% who say, nope, other report tabs are sufficient. I can see what I need to, for instance, in the performance tab. 5% say, you know what, I'm not sure how to read it, so don't really know what to do with it. And 1% said, you know what, I have no idea what you're talking about. So let me just give a couple more moments for you to respond there. And once again, this is incredibly helpful information for us as we're working on making improvements to these forms in their current state or in a more automated system, just to get a sense as to how you're using this information, what might be valuable to you, and what might be just simply extraneous information. So thank you very much for your responses, and please take another moment if you haven't yet. Aha, saying not sure. I assume this is the same. So this is the one that comes right after the 701B participant info, and it's labeled as goal versus actual. So if you see in the, it is to the right of 701B. And Kate put in there a little screenshot of what it looks like, how that's labeled. Okay, I think we can close out that poll. Thank you again, Taylor. It looks like I need to reshare my slides. I love it when technology mostly cooperates. This is fantastic. So thank you for responding on both of those polls. Keep the questions coming in the chat as we continue to walk through. A couple of these slides you might think, these are really familiar. I think maybe you went over them before. So these are going to be familiar to you if you've been a part of this group in the past, which we hope we have return attendees every quarter. There have just been some additional questions that have come into the HVRP mailbox. So we really wanted to make sure that we went over this information again and had an opportunity for you to ask any additional questions because we know this has been an item that's been a little bit confusing. So the next couple slides are recaps of some stuff we've talked about before, but want to make sure we go through again and help clarify anything that might need to be clarified. So one of the questions that we've gotten in the past is, can you provide training to a participant who has already gotten a job? So basically, this is someone you've served. After you've started serving them, they've gotten a placement, they've gotten employment. Can you then continue to pay for training? So once a grantee exits a participant, once you exit that participant, the grantee can only provide follow-up services. So if the grantee knows that this job is just to get the participant working and earning an income, then the grantee will not want to take the placement. This will allow the grantee to continue providing services to the participant, including training needed to achieve a desired job or entry into a specific career. So the question is, so we can't help underemployed vets. Absolutely, you can help underemployed vets. But the idea is, once you take that placement and say, great, this person has entered employment, we're going to now start doing follow-up services and follow-up tracking. That then has started a whole new world. So what you want to do is say, no, this is just underemployment, meaning this isn't enough. The wages aren't what someone's ideally looking for. The number of hours aren't what someone is ideally looking for, or isn't at the level that is really the goal for this participant. Then you would not want to take the placement so that you can continue providing the full bevy of services. Just pausing to see if there are any other questions coming in on that. The next slide is related. And so this is what if you have a participant who's exited to employment, but then loses the job and comes back looking for full services? So let's say, for instance, you find a great job for a participant. This is something they were really looking for, the kind of job they were looking for, and for some reason they're laid off or something else happens so that that placement no longer exists. So that person then comes back to you and says, I need help again because this placement didn't work out. So in fact, there are two factors here to figure out how you would proceed, and it depends upon how much calendar time has passed. So if in fact someone's returning within 90 days of exit, then you can reopen the case and provide full employment and training services yet again. So open up the same placement, not a problem. That means that if the case is reopened, the exit date prior placement outcome, average hourly wages must be deleted because you're no longer taking that as a positive outcome because you're recognizing you need to now provide additional services. Now, and I see questions coming up in the chat. Don't worry, we're going to get to those. If, in fact, more than 90 days have occurred since that original placement, since that exit, then you can choose, as the grantee, you can choose to re-enroll the participant as long as they still meet the HVRP eligibility criteria. So from a qualifying for services standpoint, it's as though someone is coming to you for the first time. So you need to re-enroll under the same participant ID number. So that means there's going to be a second record in the TPR, and that's okay. That's what that should look like. The prior placement outcome and wages at placement need to be deleted because you can only have one set of placement outcomes per participant per program year. And then you would reopen the case. Re-enrolling is ultimately your discretion as the grantee as whether that's how you want to proceed. But basically, that's what the decision you need to make if 90 days or more has passed since the exit. So I got a question that came in from Robert. So is it correct to exit a participant after placement? So when someone has a placement and you record in there that they've exited to employment, that means you've now entered this new period of service, which is follow-up services. It's a lot more limited in what you can spend money on for that participant because, in fact, they've met the goal of the program, which is to achieve employment and employment along the goals of what you and the participant have set out as realistic for that participant. Does the re-enrollment after 90 days include exited without placement? So regardless of how someone has exited, if they're coming back to you before 90 days or after 90 days, the same would hold. So that's a great question. So they might be leaving you and no longer be in services, even though they didn't get placement. They didn't find a job. If they come back to you before 90 days, then you can reactivate the existing enrollment. If they come after 90 days, you would need to reassess the eligibility criteria. So great question. Thank you for that. Other questions on these scenarios? And thank you to those. I see some people are popping in. So glad you're able to join us. Is there a requirement for a participant who's been placed to have OJT or other training? That's a good question. So if in fact you mean whether or not there's a requirement to have training services provided before placement, in many cases that would depend upon what the plan is for that person. If you're talking about some sort of training after placement, that's not something the program can pay for once the placement is complete. So then you're only providing follow-up services, and that would not include like major investments in training. So David, feel free to unmute yourself or ask a follow-up question if I haven't addressed what your question was. And then let's see, Rock says, if a veteran gets a job and is exited, can you buy him tools or boots for his job? So there are a number of things that are allowed as follow-up services. If you have any questions about what those might be and what you can provide and do, please talk to your GOATer. But in general, yes, those are the sorts of things that are exactly considered appropriate for follow-up services because it's things that would support them retaining that employment. Okay, and then we have a question from Christy. When you re-enroll them, they count as a new placement and they would qualify for new employment supplies, right? So when you re-enroll someone, over 90 days has occurred since they've exited, whether they went to a job or for some other reason they exited, it's a brand new enrollment. So whatever services and supports they would qualify as an HVRP participant would once again apply once you re-sign them up. Other questions? We're also getting to the point where we're going to ask for brand new questions you might have that have not come up at all today. So be thinking about those. Like I said, this session is really about providing some information, but more importantly about finding out what additional questions you might have as you're starting to work on your quarterly reporting. You can also go back to any of the information we've covered so far as well, if that's helpful. Okay, while you're thinking about your questions, I'm going to go back for just a moment, if you'll bear with me. So I want to make sure that I've clarified any sort of confusion I might have created around these forms. So your fiscal year, so your program year 20 cohort, you continue to report on the 2020 form. For cohort starting in 2021, you're going to be using the 2021 form. Any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. Oh, we do have another question. Alyssa, if after 90 days has passed and we want to re-enroll the participant in the program and need to delete the previous placement and the previous enrollment becomes a negative exit, correct? So that would in fact be true because you have two different enrollments and the first one did not end well. So yes, so that will potentially be an issue for you. Hopefully one placement is not going to put you above or below your targets, but yes, that is an accurate observation because you can only have one placement per program year. So in determining, yes, this person really does need to re-enroll, that is part of the situation in re-enrolling them is losing that original placement. So hopefully you'd be in working with the individual making the judgment call as to whether or not there is a continued needs for services above and beyond, do they meet the basic criteria, and then trying to figure out what works best for that participant. You're very welcome, Alyssa. Other questions? Wouldn't that change the performance that was documented during that quarter? Yes, it would. So that does mean that, in fact, there are situations where performance that you recorded in a previous quarter will ultimately change if something happens in a later quarter that impacts that. That is correct. And if you're at all concerned about that, or like I said, if that's something that puts you below 85% of your target, that's something you want to have a conversation with your GOATer about for any questions you might have or clarifications about that. Some question, will this be available after this? I was informed after the start time and missed most of the meeting. Is today's presentation going to be made available to us? So yes, and yes, and yes. So what you will get as follow-up information is there will be a Q&A document based upon the questions that you've asked today and answers to those. The recording will also be available. That will all be available through the NBTAC website. So please do stay tuned for that. Thank you for joining us late. Even if you didn't get notice before this meeting started. We can also make sure to add you to, please send an email to the HVRP mailbox if you were not on this mailing list and you want to be. So I'm jumping ahead here so you can see the email right there. Please do let us know if you want to be added to this mailing list, but we will be sending out a link to recording as well as Q&A from the session. Tanya, do we handle businesses closing and the vet loses their job the same? We had a lot of issues with this in Washington. Okay, so I'm sure this is a very common question for anyone who's been, oh, and thank you, Layla. Layla has just put in the chat the link to that section on NBTAC where you can see information from previous sessions, and you'll be seeing information pop up for this one once we're able to process all of that. Thank you. So in terms of a business closing and a vet loses their job. So no matter why someone you've served is losing their job, if it's because it wasn't a good fit for them, because, for instance, they needed to resign the job because they needed to spend a month taking care of a family member, who knows what the circumstances might be, or it might be the job just doesn't exist anymore. Either there was a layoff or the employer completely shut down. In any case, the key question is, does that participant come back to you and say, okay, this didn't work out. I want some more help in getting another job? That would then be the key question, regardless of how it happened. And that's when this 90-day before-after issue would be at play. So if it's been 90 days, within 90 days of that original placement, then you can start serving them once again once you take out that placement. If more than 90 days has passed, then you would want to be redetermining eligibility and re-enrolling. But it doesn't matter what the reason was for the placement failing. I will make a plug for our next session. So this one was a little bit earlier in the day. That's partly because we were rescheduling after the holidays because we didn't want to be holding a session when you all would be out of the office. we wanted to make the most of this session with you all. So the next session will be on March 30th, and that'll be at 3 p.m. Eastern, which has been our typical time. So you can look forward to that. Andrea, now if there is not a gap in quarters for employment, we will still need to find them second jobs for the job retention piece, even though we can't count the job. We still have to assist with the replacement jobs, critical performance measures. Okay, so that's another great question. So if you're saying they lost a job, you need to find them a second job because the first job has ended. That's again where you would be, because that will impact your measures. That's absolutely right, because they're looking to see whether or not in that second quarter of after exit and then fourth quarter after exit, if there's still employment. So the question then once again is, however, is in fact, do you need to remove the placement? You would need to remove the placement if you want to either re-enroll them or continue serving them and have the full gamut of HVRP services available to them, including things like training. If in fact you're providing, the exit is staying, you would then be able to provide follow-up services. That is a much more limited list of things that you can provide. So Andrea, if I didn't answer that question, please, okay, or lose, yes. So if in fact someone doesn't retain employment beyond that first quarter, yes, that will absolutely show up in your measures. Gabrielle, can you just provide non-intensive employment services, job leads, as part of follow-up? So once again, if you have any questions about what you can and cannot provide in follow-up, you can go look in the terms and conditions of your grant, of course, but we recommend you talk to your GODER if you have any questions about whether or not something you want or need to provide would fall within that bucket. Yes, and Maria just reminding folks that please, if you're not on the mailing list, please send an email to HVRP and we will get you added to the mailing list. How do we handle, thank you, Tanya, how do we handle clients working for temp services? I think as long as the business is still providing jobs, it would be one job. Okay, so that's a great question. So if in fact they're maybe working for a couple different employers, but all through the same temp agency, the way that employment is typically recorded in this world of workforce development is they are employed by the temp agency. So regardless of if the temp agency is sending them out to different places, that would be considered that one because the employer is the temp agency. Okay, Andrea, no, just stating that they still have to help and may as well leave the original placement with no funds, job leads, etc. I get letters saying the job can go permanent, but I like your thinking better. Okay, so yeah, if in fact someone is in a job that is not, this is not what you and the participant planned, this is definitely an underemployment situation, either at a lower level than you were working for them to be qualified for, or too few hours, then you're probably going to be in a position where you're going to want to remove that placement because you recognize that this is not the goal we set out for this participant and working with the participant. And so we need to be able to provide full services, continue providing full services to that participant. So we would then not take the placement. Okay, I think I've caught up with the notes in the chat. Please keep them coming in. But just a big thank you to all of you who were on the call. This session only kind of works if we have participation, we have folks joining and also asking questions, posing questions. I know it's a cliche, but if you have a question, it's never stupid because someone else has that question too. You're not the only one. So thank you for participating. Please, as questions come up, ultimately talk to your GODERs. They're your first line of defense, as we like to say, in terms of helping provide answers to questions. But also, too, feel free, especially if you want something brought up at one of these quarterly sessions, please send an email to the HVRP mailbox stating what the issue or question is. Also, if you want to be added to this mailing list, please send an email to the HVRP inbox. This allows us to best provide you with the tools and resources you need to once again do that important work for veterans, right? That's why we're doing all this. That's why we're filling out these forms. That's why we have these measures, is because the work you're doing is incredibly important, and we're more than happy to be here to help and support you in that.
I just had a quick question. I wanted to, because the last 2 meetings, I kind of received the meeting info roundabout, and I was trying to see if there's a way I can get on like the mailing list so that I get notified of the meetings firsthand, and then I can, support better.
Yes, absolutely. You just send an email right there to hvrp@dol.gov and let us know you want to be added to the mailing list.
All right, will do. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.